Well now, good evening, friends. Andy Taylor here. What if I told you that anonymous letters started appearing in Mayberry, each one revealing someone's most carefully guarded secret? And as panic spread through town with everyone suspecting their neighbors, I discovered that the person writing these poisoned pen letters was the last person anyone would suspect. And their reason for doing it was more heartbreaking than malicious. This is a story about secrets, about the fear of exposure, and about how sometimes the cruelest things we do are driven not by hatred, but by our own desperate pain. It started on a Tuesday morning in April of 1962 when Floyd Lawson came into my office, looking shaken and upset. He handed me an envelope, plain white, addressed to him with no return address, postmarked from Mayberry the day before. "Sheriff," he said, his hands trembling slightly, "someone sent me this. I don't know who or why, but it's got me worried." I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The message was typed, single-spaced, on what looked like a standard typewriter. It read, "Floyd Lawson wasn't always a barber in Mayberry. In 1943, he was dishonorably discharged from the Army for desertion. He left his unit in the middle of battle and hid until the war was over. The town thinks he's a veteran. The truth is, he's a coward who let his brothers in arms down when they needed him most." Floyd looked at me with anguish in his eyes. "It's true, Andy," he said quietly. "All of it. I was young and scared, and I made a terrible mistake that I've regretted every day of my life. I came to Mayberry after the war to start over, and I've tried to be a good man ever since. But I never told anyone the truth because I was ashamed. Now someone knows, and they're threatening to expose me. Who would do this?" I assured Floyd that we'd investigate, that I'd find out who sent the letter and why. But even as I spoke, I wondered how anyone in Mayberry could have known about Floyd's past from nearly 20 years ago. 2 days later, Clara Edwards received a similar letter. Hers revealed that she'd had a child out of wedlock when she was 17, a child she'd given up for adoption and never told anyone in Mayberry about. The day after that, Mayor Pike got a letter revealing that he'd falsified some of his credentials when running for office, claiming degrees he didn't actually have. Then came letters to Mrs. Henderson about a past affair, to Mr. Collins about financial troubles he'd hidden from his family, to Miss Crump about a teaching position she'd been fired from years ago at another school. Within a week, 7 people in Mayberry had received these poison pen letters, each one revealing a secret they'd kept hidden, sometimes for decades. The town was in an uproar. People were frightened, wondering who would be exposed next, questioning who among them could possibly know all these secrets. Neighbors who'd been friends for years now looked at each other with suspicion. Was it the postmaster who handled all the mail? Was it someone at the newspaper who might have access to old records? Was it a newcomer to town who'd somehow dug up everyone's past? Trust, which had always been the foundation of our small community, was eroding rapidly. I called a town meeting to address the situation. "Folks," I said, "I know everyone is scared and upset. These letters are cruel, and they're causing real harm. I want you to know that I'm investigating this with everything I have, and I will find out who's behind this. In the meantime, please remember that everyone has things in their past they're not proud of. These letters are designed to divide us. Don't let them succeed." But privately, I was struggling with the investigation. The letters gave me very little to work with. They were all typed on the same typewriter, based on the distinctive worn letter E and slightly crooked T that appeared in each one. They were all mailed from the Mayberry post office. The information in them was accurate, which meant the writer either had access to old records or had somehow learned these secrets through personal knowledge. I started by checking who in town owned typewriters. In 1962, typewriters weren't in every home, but they weren't rare either. I made a list of everyone who had one: the newspaper office, the courthouse, several businesses, and maybe a dozen individuals who had them at home for various reasons. That gave me too many possibilities and not enough evidence to narrow it down. I decided to look at the pattern of information. How would someone know about Floyd's military discharge from 20 years ago? How would they know about Clara's child from 40 years ago? How would they know about Miss Crump's firing from a school in another county? Either the writer had spent months or years researching everyone in town, or they'd been in Mayberry long enough to have gathered this information over time through observation and gossip. I started interviewing each victim privately, asking them who might know their secrets. Floyd thought perhaps someone from his army unit had come to town, though he couldn't imagine why they'd wait 20 years to expose him. Clara had no idea. She'd never told anyone in Mayberry about her past. The others were equally puzzled. Then an 8th letter arrived, and this one changed everything. It was addressed to Emily Patterson, a quiet woman in her mid-40s who worked as a librarian and kept mostly to herself. When she brought the letter to me, she was crying. "Sheriff," she said, "this letter doesn't reveal a secret about me. It reveals something I've been terrified might come out. Someone is blackmailing me. They know something I did, and they're threatening to expose it if I don't pay them. But I can't pay. I don't have money. So I guess they're just going to tell everyone anyway." The letter she showed me was different from the others. It said, "Emily Patterson knows what she did in 1958. She thought no one would ever find out, but I know. I know about the money, about the lies, about everything. This is her last warning." I looked at Emily carefully. "Emily," I said gently, "what happened in 58? What is this letter referring to?" She broke down completely. "4 years ago," she said through tears, "I was working as a bookkeeper for a business in Mount Pilot. I was going through a terrible time. My mother was sick. Medical bills were piling up. I was desperate. I embezzled money from my employer. Not a lot, just enough to pay the bills, and I planned to pay it back. But I got caught. My employer was kind. He didn't press charges, but he fired me. I came to Mayberry to start over, got the library job, and I've been trying to live honestly ever since. But now someone knows, and they're going to destroy the new life I've built." And then she said something that made my detective instincts suddenly alert. "Sheriff," she said, "I think I know who might be writing these letters." I leaned forward. "Who?" She hesitated, then said, "I think it might be me." The room went very quiet. "What do you mean?" I asked. Emily explained through her tears. "For the past month," she said, "I've been receiving threats. Anonymous notes saying someone knows about my past and will expose me unless I do something, though they never said what. I've been terrified, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. And then these letters started appearing around town, and I realized the pattern. Every single person who received a letter has something in their past they're ashamed of, just like me. And I started thinking, what if I wrote these letters? What if in my fear and anxiety and sleeplessness, I somehow wrote them without fully realizing what I was doing? I found a typewriter in my house that I don't remember owning. I've lost track of time lately. Whole afternoons I can't account for. What if I did this? I looked at this distraught woman and realized I needed to tread very carefully. Emily, I said, do you have the threatening notes you received? Can you show them to me? She pulled several from her purse. They were typed on the same typewriter as the poison pen letters to the others. Do you recognize the typewriter in your house? I asked. When did it appear? She shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it's always been there and I didn't notice. Or maybe I bought it and forgot. I've been so confused lately, Sheriff. I don't know what's real anymore. I'm so afraid I've done something terrible without meaning to. I asked Emily if I could examine her house, particularly the typewriter. She agreed immediately, desperate for answers. At Emily's small house near the library, we found the typewriter on a desk in her spare room. I typed a test sentence and compared it to the poison pen letters. It was a match, the same worn E, the same crooked T. This was definitely the typewriter used to write all the letters. But something didn't add up. I looked around Emily's house carefully. It was neat, organized, everything in its place. This wasn't the home of someone having a psychological breakdown, so severe they were doing things without knowing it. I asked Emily more questions about the threatening notes she'd received. When did the first one arrive? About 5 weeks ago, she said. And how did you receive them? They were left at the library, slipped under the door, or left on my desk. Never mailed. That detail was important. The poison pen letters to everyone else had been mailed, but Emily's threats had been hand-delivered. I sat down and thought through the timeline carefully. Emily started receiving threats 5 weeks ago. The poison pen letters to others started appearing 3 weeks ago. Emily's letter, the one accusing her but not revealing specific details, arrived last after all the others. And Emily had access to old gossip and secrets because she worked at the library, where people came to research and chat and share stories. An idea was forming, one I didn't like but couldn't ignore. Emily, I said carefully, I don't think you wrote these letters. I think someone wanted you to think you did. They planted that typewriter in your house, sent you threatening notes to make you paranoid and afraid. And then, when the other letters started appearing, you'd be so confused and guilty that you'd confess to something you didn't do. But why? She asked. Who would do that? I thought about it carefully. Someone who knew your past, I said. Someone who discovered your secret about the embezzlement and decided to use it against you. But not for money. For something else. To create chaos in town? To make people suspect each other? Or maybe to make everyone so focused on these letters that they wouldn't notice something else entirely. I went back to my office and started investigating Emily's background more carefully, particularly who might know about her past in Mount Pilot. I made some phone calls, talked to people at her former employer, traced connections, and I found something interesting. Emily's former employer's nephew had moved to Mayberry about 6 months ago. His name was David Morrison, and he was working as a clerk at the courthouse, where he would have access to a typewriter and would hear all sorts of information about town residents. I brought David in for questioning. He was a young man in his late 20s, nervous and defensive when I asked him about the letters. I don't know anything about any letters, he said. Why would I? But when I mentioned his uncle's business in Mount Pilot and Emily Patterson, his face went pale. I know Emily worked for my uncle, he said. I know she took money from him. My uncle was too kind, didn't press charges, but it cost his business. It nearly ruined him. When I found out she was here in Mayberry, working at the library like nothing had happened, I was angry. She got away with it while my uncle suffered. So you decided to expose her? I asked. David shook his head. Not exactly. I was angry, yes. And I did send her those first threatening notes. I wanted her to be afraid, to feel some of what my uncle felt. But then I realized that just exposing her wouldn't be enough. She'd claim she'd changed. People might forgive her. I wanted her to feel real guilt, to confess to something worse, Dot. So you wrote letters exposing other people's secrets? I asked, trying to understand his logic. David nodded slowly, looking miserable now. I worked at the courthouse, heard things, learned things about people. I thought if I exposed others first, made the whole town paranoid about secrets, and then put the typewriter in Emily's house and sent her that final vague letter, she'd think she'd been doing it in some kind of psychological break. She'd confess, be blamed for all of it, and people would be so angry about what she'd done, they'd never forgive her. It was cruel, I know, but I wanted her to suffer like my uncle suffered. I looked at this young man who'd caused so much pain out of misplaced anger and a desire for revenge. David, I said, what you did was illegal. You committed multiple counts of harassment, broke into Emily's home to plant that typewriter, and caused significant emotional distress to innocent people. All because you wanted revenge on one person for something that happened 4 years ago, something that had nothing to do with anyone else in this town. David was charged with harassment and breaking and entering. The case went to court, and he was sentenced to a year in jail and ordered to apologize publicly to each person whose secrets he'd exposed. The town's reaction was complex. People were relieved to know who'd written the letters and why, but they were also dealing with the aftermath of having their secrets revealed. Floyd had to face people knowing about his desertion. Clara had to acknowledge the child she'd given up. Mayor Pike had to admit his lies. Some people were understanding. Others were judgmental. But gradually, over time, the town began to heal. People realized that everyone has things in their past they're ashamed of, and that the measure of a person isn't their worst moment, but how they live in the years that follow. Emily Patterson was cleared of suspicion, and the town rallied around her in support. Many people felt guilty for having suspected her, even briefly. She continued working at the library, and people treated her with new kindness and respect, understanding now what she'd been going through. Floyd kept his barbershop, and while some people looked at him differently, many others saw him as a man who'd made a mistake decades ago and had spent the rest of his life trying to be better. The revelation of everyone's secrets had an unexpected effect on Mayberry. In some ways, it made us more honest with each other. When everyone's imperfections are known, there's less pressure to pretend to be perfect. The case taught me something important about secrets and the damage they can cause, not just when they're kept, but when they're weaponized. David Morrison had used other people's secrets as weapons, not even against the person he was angry with, but against innocent bystanders, all to create a trap for Emily. His poison pen letters had nearly destroyed the trust and peace of an entire community. But they also revealed something about the nature of small towns. We all think we're keeping our secrets, but in truth, whispers travel, information spreads, and people know more than we realize. The question is what they choose to do with that knowledge. Most people, I learned, choose kindness. They choose to let the past stay in the past, It's only the bitter, the angry, the ones seeking revenge who choose to expose and harm Dot. In the months after the case closed, I noticed something else. Several people in town who'd been carrying secrets they were terrified might come out decided to share them voluntarily, on their own terms. They realized that secrets lose their power when you control how they're told. Miss Crump talked openly about being fired from her previous teaching position and what she'd learned from the experience. Mrs. Henderson, whose affair had been revealed, talked honestly with her husband, and they worked through it together. The fear of exposure had been worse than the actual exposure for most people. And in some cases, the sharing of these long-held secrets actually strengthened relationships and communities rather than destroying them. Emily Patterson came to see me a few weeks after the trial. "Sheriff," she said, "I wanted to thank you, not just for figuring out what David did, but for believing in me when I thought I might be losing my mind. There were moments when I truly believed I'd written those letters without knowing it, that I was capable of such cruelty. You helped me understand that feeling guilty doesn't make you guilty, and that our worst fears about ourselves aren't always true." I told her that she'd been a victim, that David had deliberately manipulated her psychological state to make her doubt herself. That kind of gaslighting, making someone question their own sanity and actions, is one of the cruelest things you can do to a person. But she'd survived it, and she was stronger now for having faced it. The typewriter that David had used and planted in Emily's house was kept as evidence and eventually destroyed. "Good riddance," Aunt Bee said when I told her about it. That machine caused nothing but pain. But I corrected her gently. "The machine didn't cause pain," I said. "It was just a tool. David Morrison caused the pain by choosing to use that tool to hurt people. We can't blame objects for human cruelty. We have to understand that the choice to harm always comes from a person, from their anger or pain or desire for revenge. Understanding that is the first step to preventing it. Well, now, that's the story of the poisoned pen letters that terrorized Mayberry, of how one angry young man nearly destroyed a town's trust trying to get revenge on a single person, and of how secrets, when used as weapons, can hurt far more people than intended. It's a reminder that everyone has things in their past they're not proud of, and that the true test of character is how we handle both our own secrets and those we learn about others. Most people choose kindness and discretion, but when someone chooses cruelty instead, the damage can spread like ripples in a pond, touching lives far beyond the intended target. If you're carrying secrets that weigh on you, remember that you're not alone in having a complicated past. And if you know someone else's secrets, remember that you have a choice about what to do with that knowledge. The kind choice, the right choice, is almost always to let people own their stories and share them when and how they're ready. Using secrets as weapons or for revenge might feel justified in the moment, but it causes harm that spreads far beyond what you intend. Be the person who chooses kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment. Come back and visit again real soon, friends. Until then, this is Andy Taylor saying goodnight from Mayberry. Remember, we all have things we wish we'd done differently, and the measure of our character is found not in our perfect moments, but in how we handle our imperfect ones. Treat others' secrets with the same care you'd want your own treated with. Take care now.